You were promised that the man you're building will finally be free of the one weakness you hate most in yourself. He won't be. And the belief that he will is the exact mechanism by which that weakness takes the wheel of your life. Stay with me, because this cuts against everything the discipline culture has sold you. You have been running on a quiet assumption that if you train hard enough, wake early enough, cut out enough of the softness and the mess, you will eventually arrive at a clean man. A finished man, purged of the envy, the rage, the fear, the hunger you find embarrassing. That the darkness is a stain and discipline is the bleach. It is a beautiful idea. It is also false, and the falseness is not harmless. Because discipline does not delete what you refuse to feel. It buries it. And what you bury does not die down there. It organizes. It learns the layout of the house while you're not looking. It starts casting votes you never granted it. This is the thing almost no one tells the ambitious man. The trait you most despise in yourself does not vanish when you stop acknowledging it. It goes underground, and from underground, it steers. It picks your fights. It chooses your rivals. It sabotages you at the exact threshold of the thing you swore you wanted. And then it hands you a story about bad luck, so you never once suspect the driver. Understand the stakes plainly before we go one sentence further. The part of yourself you refuse to look at is not the part that stays quiet. It is the part that runs your life, not the disciplined surface you present to the world, the disowned thing underneath it. And the only way it ever comes back under your command is the one move you have spent years avoiding, turning around in the dark and looking directly at it. Carl Jung had a name for that buried thing. He called it the shadow. And the first work you have to do is strip that word of everything the movies taught you, because the movie version will keep you from ever finding the real one. Shadow is not your inner villain. It is not a demon, not a beast, not some secret capacity for evil crouching behind your ribs waiting to be released. That framing actually flatters you. It lets you imagine the disowned parts of yourself are dramatic and dangerous, which is far more comfortable than the truth. The truth is more ordinary and more useful. The shadow is simply the sum of everything about yourself you have refused to own. Everything you decided didn't fit the man you were trying to be, and so pushed out of the light. And here is the part that matters most for you, specifically. The shadow is not only the ugly things. Yes, it holds the cruelty and the envy and the pettiness you'd rather not admit to. But it also holds strength you exiled in order to look agreeable. It holds the anger you were told was unprofessional, the appetite you called greedy, the tenderness you decided was weakness, the raw ambition you learned to hide so you wouldn't seem like a man who wanted too much. All of it went into the same dark room, sorted under one label: not me. You did this to perform an ideal. To be the calm one, the reasonable one, the man who never seems to strain. And the performance worked. That's exactly why you kept doing it. But everything you cut away to build that image is still yours. You didn't destroy it. You just stopped answering to it. So hear the reframe, because the whole essay turns on it. Confronting your shadow is not a moral confession. It is not you kneeling down to admit how rotten you secretly are. It is a recovery operation. You are going down into the dark to bring back the power you left there. To see how this happens, you need the mechanism, and it's cleaner than you'd think. Jung noticed that every one of us builds a mask to meet the world. He called it the persona. The persona is the version of you engineered to win. The competent one at work, the steady one at home, the man who has it handled. It is not a lie exactly. It's a curated selection. take the traits that get rewarded, and you turn the volume up, and you take the traits that get punished, and you push them down out of sight. But here is the geometry Jung insisted on, and this is the thing to hold on to. A mask that faces the light casts a shadow behind it. Always. And the sharper, the more polished, the more flawless the mask. The denser the shadow it throws. The man with the most immaculate front is not the man with the least darkness. He is the man carrying the most of it, unexamined, directly behind him, where he cannot see it. And that shadow does not stay politely behind you. It gets out through a mechanism Jung called projection. This is the part you need to catch. The disowned traits you can't tolerate in yourself, you begin to see vividly in other people. You meet your own shadow first in the men you cannot stop despising. That rival whose ambition you find disgusting, look closely at how disproportionate your disgust is. That colleague whose neediness you hold in contempt, notice how it enrages you past all reason. The intensity is the tell. You do not react that violently to a stranger's trait. You react that violently to your own, worn by someone else. Jung put it with unusual force. The effect of projection, he wrote, is to isolate the subject from his environment, since instead of a real relation to it, there is now only an illusory one. Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. Read that again. You end up living not in the real world, but inside a replica of the parts of yourself you refuse to know. And every enemy in it is a mirror you can't recognize. If this is the kind of work you've been circling, the forging of the mind, not just the body, then subscribe and stay with this channel. It's built for men doing the harder, quieter labor beneath the training. No hacks here. Just the work that actually changes a man. Now let's get back to it, because the next part is where it starts to cost something. Before you dismiss this as theory, you need to know where it came from, because Jung did not work this out from a comfortable chair. He earned it by nearly coming apart. And the reason that matters to you is simple. Everything he's about to ask of you, he did first, on himself, at real risk. For years he had been the crown prince of psychoanalysis, Freud's chosen heir, the brilliant younger man the whole movement expected to inherit it. Then he broke with Freud, publicly, painfully, over exactly the question of what lies beneath the surface of a man. The break cost him his mentor, his standing, and much of his professional world. What followed, in his early 40s, is one of the strangest and bravest episodes in the history of the field. Jung deliberately turned and walked into his own unconscious. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious. He was not stable during it. He experienced visions he could not explain, floods of imagery and dread, voices and figures that rose up unbidden. A lesser man would have looked away, medicated it, denied it. Jung did the opposite. He kept a disciplined record. He sat with the images, questioned them, drew and painted them, wrote them out in the volume that became known as the Red Book. He treated his own darkness as territory to be mapped, rather than an illness to be suppressed. He went down on purpose, and he kept his notebook open the whole way. This is why his voice carries a weight the modern self-help voice does not. Jung's rule for himself was simple and severe. He would not teach what he had not first survived. He refused to prescribe a descent he hadn't made. Everything he later said about the shadow, that facing it is hard, that it demands real effort, that it cannot be shortcut. He said, as a man reporting from ground, he had actually walked, not a man selling a map of a country he'd only heard about. Keep that in mind through everything that follows. When Jung tells you this work is difficult, he is not warning you off. He is telling you that the difficulty is the proof you're doing the real thing. He knew, because he had been down there, and he had come back. Now, let's be concrete about what happens to the man who won't go down, because this is where the title stops being a metaphor. The shadow does not simply sit quiet and cost you nothing. Left unconfronted, it collects interest, and it always, eventually, comes to collect. Watch how it leaks. The man who buried his rage to seem controlled does not become a man without rage. He becomes a man whose rage seeps out sideways. As contempt, as a cold cutting remark, as a hardness toward the people he loves that he'd swear he can't help. The man who disowned his own neediness, who decided he'd never be the one who wants too much, does not stop needing. Converts it into control. He grips his relationships, his team, his outcomes, and calls it standards. The man who never let himself grieve a life he didn't live wakes up one morning at 45 with something roaring in him he cannot name. And he burns down the marriage, the company, the reputation he spent 20 years building, in a fire he will describe to everyone as a midlife crisis. It was not a crisis. It was a bill coming due. Jung named this state precisely. A man who is possessed by his shadow, he wrote, is always standing in his own light and falling into his own traps. Standing in your own light. Falling into your own traps. That is self-sabotage, described decades before the word was fashionable. The man who torpedoes his own launch, who picks the fight right before the big meeting, who undercuts himself at the very edge of winning, and cannot, for the life of him, say why. The reason he cannot say why is the cruelest part of all. Here is the line Jung actually wrote. Not the softened version that gets passed around, but the real one. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. Sit with that. The thing you won't face inside doesn't disappear. It reappears in your life as circumstance, as bad luck, as fate. As a pattern of collapse that seems to happen to you, when in truth it is being staged from underground by the part of you that never got a hearing. That is the whole meaning of the title. Confront it, or it runs your life while wearing the mask of destiny. So what do you actually do? Not feel. Do. Jung was explicit that this is work. He called it a considerable moral effort. So let's treat it as work, with a method. Here is the first move, and it's the one you can run tomorrow. Use your strongest irritation as a compass. The next time another man's trait sends a charge through you that is out of all proportion, the flash of contempt, the sudden coldness, the disgust that arrives before you've even had a thought. Not act on it and do not swallow it. Mark it. That flare is not noise. Jung said something exact about this. Emotion, incidentally, is not an activity of the individual, but something that happens to him. Effects occur usually where adaptation is weakest. Translate that for your purposes. Your disproportionate reactions surface at the precise seam where you are least in control of yourself. Overreaction is a map. It is pointing straight at buried territory. So build the move into 3 steps and keep them boring on purpose. First, name the charge, not the person, the charge. I am having a violent reaction to how badly he wants recognition. Second, ask the uncomfortable question. Where does that live in me? Not, am I a little like that, as a soft maybe, but where, specifically, have I exiled exactly this? The recognition I pretend I'm above wanting. The ambition I hide so I won't look hungry. Third, write it down. On paper, in your own hand, where you cannot pretend later that you didn't see it. This is what Jung meant by withdrawing a projection. You are taking back a piece of yourself that you had loaned out to an enemy, so you wouldn't have to hold it. It is unglamorous, will sting, and every single time you do it, one of your phantom battles quietly dissolves. Because you'll have discovered that the man you were fighting out there was only ever standing in for the man in here. The projection work is reactive. It depends on the world provoking you. The second practice is deliberate. You go looking, on your own schedule, without waiting to be triggered. Call it the shadow inventory. Once a day, or at the very least once a week, you sit down and you review not what you did, but what you edited out. Go back through the hours and find the impulses you censored before they ever reached the surface. A stab of envy when a friend won something you wanted, the one you smoothed over in half a second and told yourself you didn't feel. The flash of the wish to dominate the room, to humiliate the man who challenged you, that you overrode with a reasonable smile. The fear you refused to admit was fear and relabeled as caution. Name them. On paper, by their real names. Now hear the crucial distinction, because this is exactly where men get it wrong and do themselves harm. Knowing your shadow is not indulging it. The inventory is not permission. You are not writing these down in order to unleash them. Go act out the envy, the cruelty, the domination. That is not integration. That is just the shadow winning through a different door. Jung's aim was never to loose the dark thing. It was to know it well enough that it stops running you from behind. And notice this too. The inventory is the exact opposite of repression, which is what you've been doing all along. Repression is refusing to see the impulse at all, shoving it down so fast you can pretend it was never there. Repression is precisely what hands the shadow its autonomy, its free hand to act on its own. The inventory is the reverse motion. You hold the impulse in full view, in consciousness, without either denying it or obeying it. You let it exist, named under your gaze. That holding, that steady, unflinching holding of what you feel without acting it out, is the whole discipline. It is harder than suppression and harder than indulgence, and it is the only thing that actually works. Now the turn you've been waiting for, whether you knew it or not, because if this were only damage control, only about catching your sabotage and holding down your uglier impulses, it would still be worth doing. But it would be a purely defensive game. And it isn't only that. Buried in your shadow, right next to the things you're ashamed of, is a great deal of what you actually need. Remember what went into the dark. Not just the cruelty. The drive you hid so you wouldn't seem like you wanted too much. The aggression you were told to file down until you had no edge left. The desire you learned to keep quiet about. The capacity to say no, to disappoint people, to hold a hard line. The very force you exiled in order to be liked. You didn't destroy those when you buried them. You disinherited yourself of them. There is a phrase in the Jungian tradition. The analyst Robert Johnson put it best, so I'll credit him rather than pin it on Jung, that the gold is in the shadow. The pithy line is Johnson's, but the point underneath it is pure Jung. The same descent that recovers your buried faults recovers your buried strengths, because you threw them both into the same room. And there is no route to the gold that goes around the dark, only down through it. Jung's own words for the whole enterprise are the ones to hold on to. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So understand what integration actually does to a man, because it is the opposite of what you fear. Facing your shadow does not make you softer. It does not sand you down into someone gentle and harmless. It makes you whole. And a whole man is harder, not weaker. The ambition you reclaim, the aggression, the capacity to refuse, these all come back online, but now under conscious command, instead of leaking out sideways. You stop being run by your force and you start wielding it. And a man who owns his own force is far harder to manipulate, because no one can pull a string he already holds in his own hand. Here is the deepest thing Jung had to say, and I want you to slow down for it, because everything so far has been leading here. The goal was never a perfect man. It was never the flawless, purged, immaculate figure you've been straining toward for years. Perfection is the persona's fantasy. It is precisely the mask's idea of what a good man is, which is exactly why chasing it drives everything real about you down into the dark. More perfect you try to appear, the denser the shadow. Perfectionism is not the cure for the shadow. It is the engine that feeds it. What Jung pointed at instead was wholeness, and these two are not the same thing. They are almost opposites. Perfection means cutting away everything that doesn't fit the ideal, until only the clean part is left. Wholeness means the opposite motion, taking back in everything you cut, including the dark, and holding all of it as yours. The perfect man is a smaller man, whittled down to a presentable sliver. The whole man is the full one. Light and dark, discipline and appetite, control and rage, all of it owned, all of it his. There is no version of you that is pure light, and the striving to become one is itself the trap. Jung understood that a man is defined by both, that there is no light drawn anywhere without a shadow falling somewhere, and to demand the light without the shadow is to demand something that does not exist and never has. The man who insists on being all good has simply decided not to know where his darkness went. It didn't go anywhere. It's standing right behind him, ungoverned, precisely because he refuses to turn around. So let go of the flawless man. He was never on offer, and chasing him was making you more dangerous, not less. A bright, disciplined surface, with an unexamined dark running the machinery underneath. Aim instead at the harder, truer thing. Not a good man in the sense of a spotless one, a whole man who knows the full inventory of what he is and answers for every part of it. And now, watch what this does to the people around you. Because shadow work is not the solitary, self-absorbed project it might sound like. In the end, it is the most relational work a man can do. And this is where it separates cleanly from the cold lone wolf distortion that tells you to wall yourself off and trust no one. Think again about projection, but from the outside this time. The man who has not met his own darkness is forced to put it somewhere. And where he puts it is onto other people. He projects his own coldness onto his wife and calls her distant. He projects his own hunger for control onto his team and calls them insubordinate. He projects his own fear onto his rivals and calls them threats. He lives, as Jung said, inside a replica of his own unknown face. And everyone close to him is conscripted, without their consent, to carry a piece of the darkness he refuses to hold himself. Now take that same man and have him do the work. Watch what happens to the people in his orbit. As he takes his own shadow back, as he stops needing his wife to be the cold one, his team to be the difficult ones, his rivals to be the monsters, the pressure comes off all of them. He stops reacting to phantoms. He stops fighting in the people he loves, battles that were only ever with himself. He becomes steadier, less volatile, genuinely safer to be near, because the people around him are no longer being handed his disowned material to carry. This is the real origin of the thing men chase and call leadership, not dominance. Dominance is just the shadow throwing its weight around. Real authority, the kind people actually follow, is a byproduct of integration. A man who has met his own darkness has nothing left to project, and so he can finally see the people in front of him as they actually are, instead of as screens for his own unknown face. That is why they trust him, not because he conquered them, because near him they are finally free of a war that was never theirs to fight. Now, the honest part, because I won't sell you a finish line that doesn't exist. This is not a weekend of insight. It is not a protocol you run for 90 days and then graduate from, clean at last. The shadow is never fully conquered. Jung was blunt about this. Although, with insight and goodwill, he wrote, the shadow can to some extent be assimilated into the conscious personality, experience shows that certain features offer obstinate resistance to moral control and prove almost impossible to influence. Some of it will fight you your whole life. Some of it will never fully come to heal. There is no final victory here. No day you get to declare yourself integrated and walk away. I know how that sounds to a man built to finish things, to close them out, to win and move on. It sounds like discouragement. It is the exact opposite, because a shadow that could be conquered once and filed away would only make you complacent. You'd win it, forget it, and it would quietly rebuild itself in the dark behind your back, exactly as it always has. The fact that the work never ends is the thing that keeps you honest. It keeps you turning around and checking. It keeps you from the fatal arrogance of the man who believes he has no darkness left in him. So reframe it the way it actually is. This is not a task with a deadline. It is a standing relationship you maintain for the rest of your life. A discipline you return to, like training. Like the very training you already know never ends. You don't lift once and declare your body finished. You already understand that a body is kept, not completed. The mind is the same. The relationship with your own shadow is kept, tended, renewed. And the man who understands that the work never ends is the man least likely to be blindsided by his own depths. The endlessness is not the bad news. It is the shape of mastery. So come back to where we started, now that you can finally see it clearly. You were promised that the disciplined man you're building would be free of the weakness you hate. He won't be. That was never on offer. But something better is. Something you could never have reached from the fantasy of purity. Not freedom from your darkness. Command of it. Hold the flip in your hands one last time. What you refuse to face runs your life. From underground, on its own, staging your sabotage and calling itself fate. And what you turn and face, you can finally command. Those are the only two options. There is no third door, no version where the shadow simply isn't there. There is only the man who won't look, and is therefore driven by the very thing he won't look at. And the man who turns around and takes the wheel back, and you already know which one you have been. You've felt it. The collapse right at the threshold, the rage that leaked out as contempt, the enemy who was somehow too familiar to be a stranger. That was never bad luck. That was a part of you, waiting in the dark, for you to finally turn around. So turn around. Not in some distant season when the building is done. Tonight, quietly, on your own, with nothing but your honesty and a piece of paper. Go and meet the man in the shadow. He is not your enemy. He is the part of you that has been carrying everything you were too afraid to hold. And he has been running things in your absence because someone had to. Jung gave you the whole instruction in a single line, and I'll leave you with it, because there is nothing left to add to it. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Not around it, but above it, through it, and down. Go make it conscious, and take your life back from the man who's been driving it in the dark.